So after the flood, Noah decides to plant a vineyard and make some wine. Because he probably thought it might help take his mind off of the watery apocalypse he just witnessed. So Noah gets drunk as a skunk and passes out naked in his tent. His son Ham shows up and the text says he sees his dad naked, which is most likely a nasty euphemism. Ham then decides to spread the word about this to, well, the only people around to listen to him, his brothers, Shem and Japheth. But Shem and Japheth are embarrassed and they take a blanket and go cover up their dad's nakedness. After Noah's done sleeping it off, he finds out what happened and he starts throwing down curses on Ham's son Canaan, while at the same time blessing Shem and Japheth. But wait a minute here, why is Noah cursing his grandson Canaan instead of his nasty son Ham? Because this story is also an origin story. It's intended to show the origins of Israel's nasty neighbors, the Canaanites. Why were the Canaanites so perverted? Because the first Canaanite, Canaan, was the son of Ham, Noah's perverted son. Shem is the ancestor of the Semitic peoples, which include many of the peoples of the ancient Near East, including the Israelites. The genealogical record in chapter 10 gives a list of nations that descended from Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In chapter 11, we come to the familiar story of the Tower of Babel. This story explains that all of the people of the ancient Near East used to speak the same language, but that at some point the people were separated from each other and began speaking in different languages. This story also appears to be an ancient Hebrew indictment against the structures and practices of ancient Babylon. So as the story goes, sometime after the flood, humanity moved eastward and settled down in the plain of Shinar, or Babylonia. Humanity began to construct large cities and towers using this amazing new technology, bricks, instead of the more traditional stones. Now humanity was afraid of becoming scattered, so they decided to make a huge city in order to make a name for themselves. This group of people united to become a superpower in the world. The people believed that if they could build a tower tall enough, then they could break into the heavens above and become gods themselves. So God comes down to the city to investigate humanity's big project, and God concludes that humanity needs limits, or else they will be able to achieve anything to which they put their minds. So God confuses everyone's language so they can't understand each other. Construction then stops and the tower becomes a joke. The city comes to be known as Babel after this, which is similar to the Hebrew word for confused. The story ends with the genealogy of the Semitic peoples, ending with Abram, son of Terah. This also brings us to the end of the primeval narratives, the stories about humanity's origins, and transitions us into the patriarchal narratives, stories about Israel's origins. But before we move on to the patriarchs, let's take one last look at the overall structure and themes of the primeval traditions that set us up for the patriarchs. The primeval narratives can be divided into two separate acts that, in a sense, present the same story but in different ways. At the beginning, we have the waters of chaos at creation, which parallels the waters of chaos at the flood. This is followed by the blessing of humanity, which parallels the blessing of Noah and his sons. Both acts then mention the fertility of the animals, followed by the fertility of the humans and their dominion over creation. In Act 1, a garden is planted with a tree in the center. In Act 2, a vineyard is planted. In both acts, nakedness is realized after partaking of the fruit. In both acts, the nakedness is then covered up and knowledge is acquired. This is followed by the utterance of curses in both acts, followed by a change in relational status between the man and the woman in the first act, and between Ham and his brothers in the second. After this, the narrator of Act 1 talks about the population of Adam's family, and the narrator of Act 2 talks about the population of Noah's family. After this, there's more trouble, with violence, corruption, and the Nephilim of Act 1, and the tower and the city of Act 2. At this point, chaos is reintroduced to the world with the flood in Act 1 and the language confusion and the dispersion of the peoples in Act 2. And then finally, Act 1 ends with Noah and his sons, and Act 2 ends with the sons of Shem, most notably Terah and Abram, who we'll learn more about next time.